we just have to demonstrate that he will not take power if he does run, making sure he, under legitimate efforts of our Constitution, does not become the next president again.
I think the left is so hell-bent on getting President Trump at any cost that they're doing real damage to our legal system in the process. I mean, that's something that as an attorney, as an American, just really concerns me, that they're running roughshod over every rule in the book, all in this desperate attempt to keep President Trump tied up with these trials instead of allowing him to run for president. Joe Biden said it. He was asked about what he was going to do about Trump running for president, and he said he was going to use quote-unquote means under our Constitution, meaning a campaign of lawfare, to prevent President Trump from being president again. Not that he was going to beat him at the ballot box, not that he was going to campaign vigorously against him, but he was going to use lawfare to prevent President Trump from being president. And that's what we've seen.
All right, folks, we are 2/5 through the work week. There's a new one for you. It is Tuesday. This is the Sean Spicer Show. The debate is 2 days away. Again, before I get too far down, I do want to say thank you to everybody who has downloaded Trump's Front Row Joes. You can go to salemnow.com to get it, to download it, or to gift it if you know somebody that should be watching it. But I'm telling you, if you've never been to a Trump rally or never understood the backbone of the MAGA movement, who these Front Row Joes are, take a look. It was 2 years in the making. I'm so proud of what has come out of this thing, this documentary. President Trump interview, Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We talked to everybody and obviously worked and lived and traveled with the Front Row Joes. Check it out. Go to frontrowjoes.movie, or just better yet, go to salemnow.com, salemnow.com. Anyway, we will be live after the debate Thursday night. Now, you're going to want to stay up because I'm sure you're not going to want to go to sleep like Joe. 10:30, we're here. It's a little late unless you're on the West Coast, but I get it, but we're going to want to give you analysis. We will be here. That's why you should hit that notification button so you get it right away. But we're going to want to break it all down for you, tell you what the highlights were, what the lowlights were, etc. We'll have that all for you. We talked a little bit about the VP stakes last night at the live that we did after the show. Again, that's why you want to get on the notification list. Debate hysteria is in full swing, though. I mean, everybody's now, oh my gosh, who's going to win? Who's going to lose? We'll continue to talk about that as we go forward. CNN is in unbelievable defensive mode. By the way, that interview, I'll talk about that in just a second. And Julian Assange, he's on his way back to Australia. Now, I know this is controversial, but give me a second. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Before I do, I want to tell you about my friends at Tax Network, because the folks at Tax Network USA have saved $1 billion for people, and they know what they're doing. The IRS has gotten billions of dollars to hire tens of thousands, 50,000 new IRS agents. Now, if you know anything, we've talked about court cases before. These are the equivalent. I mean, these agents have nothing to do. They have the full resources of the government behind them. There's nothing that will stop them. Like a dog with a bone when they want to get your money because they think that's how, you owe taxes. Maybe you haven't filed, maybe you owe 10,000, 10 million. It doesn't matter how much, whether it's personal, business, whatever. Do not talk to the IRS without professional help. And I'm telling you, my folks and friends at Tax Network USA know exactly what they're doing. They have a ton of experience. Go to tnusa.com/Sean Spicer, full name there, tnusa.com/Sean Spicer, or call them at 1-800-245-6000 and tell them I sent you. You do not want to have a conversation with the IRS without professional expertise. And these guys have been doing this for years and recovered over $1 billion for their clients. Do not answer the call, the letter, or the knock on your door from the IRS without the folks from Tax Network USA being on your side. Go to tnusa.com/Sean Spicer to get the help you need if you get one of these pay up letters from the IRS or they knock on your door or you call. All right, let me get back to what's happening. The first thing I want to talk about is the backlash and the whiplash and the other lashes that are going on at CNN. You saw the folks, we talked about this last night, that interview with Caroline Leavitt on with Casey Hunt, who's the washed up MSNBC host who made her way to low rating CNN, and said somehow that Caroline Leavitt asking people to Google Jake Tapper was an attack. To Google Jake Tapper, because God forbid you find out his real history. So CNN well, first of all, the rest of the media all circled the wagons to make sure they protected CNN and their friendly host. So CNN then released a statement last night, and this is what it says. Jake Tapper and Dana Bash are well-respected veteran journalists who have covered politics for more than 5 decades combined. They have extensive experience moderating major political debates, including CNN's Republican presidential primary debate this cycle. There are no two better people equipped to co-moderate substantial and fact-based discussion. We look forward to the debate on June 27th in Atlanta. Well, CNN would like to say that's without evidence. Why are they the two best? I mean, I get they have to say it, but that's the kind of stuff that they would hit Trump for, wouldn't it? Without evidence, they say that they are the two best people. I can name a lot of better people, to be honest with you. I mean, and also this idea that Jake isn't political is insane. So then the media reporter who doubles as a spokesman for CNN, Oliver Darcy, he writes a letter called Reliable Sources. It should be Unreliable Sources. And it's basically a newsletter to promote CNN and its entities and attack everybody on the right. Right? So it's not fact-based. It's without evidence over and over again. But this is what he wrote last night. MAGA media has also settled around a scapegoat to protect Trump if he should perform poorly. CNN. Media, the dishonest pro-Trump forces, particularly the overt propagandist Sean Hannity, have leveled a barrage of attacks aimed at Jake Tapper, who will be co-moderating the debate alongside Dana Bash. Now, here's the fun part. Tapper, the hard-hitting anchor and CNN chief Washington correspondent, he's so hard-hitting, has been portrayed as a Democratic hack, which is an absurd accusation. It is one MAGA media is gleefully pushing and even attempting to do so on CNN's own air. Now, look, again, without evidence, portrayed as a Democratic hack. He is a Democratic hack. Go to Wikipedia. I know Jake doesn't put it on his own website, but Wikipedia will detail it. And I told you last night, he worked as the campaign press secretary and official press secretary for Chelsea Clinton's mother-in-law when she was a member of Congress, a Democratic member of Congress from Pennsylvania. He was also the spokesman for handgun control. This is a left-wing activist, a Democratic staffer. That's a fact. That's not portraying somebody. It's a fact. He did it. And I'm just telling you that these guys, they are circling the wagons. They are trying to protect him. They're scared. They get it. And those are all facts. Nothing I've said here is my opinion or interpretation. It's a fact. So they can circle the wagons and protect this guy all they want. And I get it. That's what they're going to do. Politico, Axios, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they will all protect him because they don't want Trump to have an out. Now, should Trump have accepted? That's a whole separate story. But the fact of the matter is, Jake Tapper is a Democratic operative. And Trump did accept the debate before they named the moderators. Now, maybe he should have said, I'll only do it if. But that's it. But the fact of the matter is, pointing out who the people are, pointing out that you're playing an away game is important. All the advantages are in Biden's behalf. That's a fact. Those are not, propagandist points. Those aren't spin. That's not my interpretation. Those are all facts. They may not like them because they are trying to help Joe Biden. And so they need to do everything they can to help him. They're going to cut off his mic. They're going to lean the questions to benefit Biden. They're going to do everything they can to. And they don't want us pointing that out. I get it. Fair enough. But that's a fact. And we need to be reminded. As I said, the other big story coming out internationally is that Julian Assange is on his way home to Australia. Now, I know this is a controversial subject, but I'm just going to tell you, I don't agree with this. This guy leaked sensitive national security information. And we made this little sweetheart deal where we gave him time served in London and he gets to step foot in a U.S. territory to plead guilty and then fly to Australia. He spent $500,000 to make this all happen so that he didn't actually have to touch foot on U.S. soil on the mainland, because that's normally what you have to do in a court case. And our government agreed to it. We are once again undermining this. Unbelievable. All right, Will Scharf is here. He is President Trump's attorney. We're going to talk about all the things that are going on. The gag order that just came out, unbelievable. Down in Florida, the government trying to gag him there about FBI, whatever. He's also running for attorney general in Missouri. But before we talk to Will, I want to tell you about something that could be unexpected. What do I mean by that? We talk about it all the time. A hit on the power grid, weather, natural disaster, knocking your power out. It could be a day, a week, a month. It could be months on end. Some of the reports about power grids being attacked are very scary. And I don't mean to be alarmist. What I'm actually trying to do is help you prepare. Because what I have done is I have a Patriot Power Generator 2000X. It's literally, I can see it right over there. I sleep soundly knowing I have it, because if something were to happen, I can plug in all the major things in my house. Our refrigerator, I can plug in my kids' tablets and phones, my phones, medical devices. Everything is covered for hours on end. And I don't have to run out and get gas because it comes complete with solar panels that it runs on. They're free. They come with it. That means I don't have to worry about fumes or big noise. The Patriot Power Generator 2000X gives you peace of mind in a time of emergency. Get ahead of the curve. Go see my friends. Go to 4patriots.com/Spicer, 4patriots.com/Spicer, and get yourself a Patriot Power Generator 2000X. All right. Now let's bring in Will Scharf, President Trump's attorney. All right, Will, we have a lot in the legal world to get to. I appreciate you being with us. First, let me just ask, I saw this story come out yesterday in Bloomberg, and it says Supreme Court signals July end to term as Trump ruling looms. What does that mean? Like, is it abnormal for them to go into July? Why would they go into July? I didn't understand necessarily the context.
Yeah, it's highly abnormal for the Supreme Court to go as late as it's now indicating it may go. We have 3 decision days this week. Supreme Court opinions are going to be issued on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week, which is irregular in and of itself. But the court has so many cases left on its docket from this term that we anticipate, a lot of legal observers anticipate, that there's going to be at least one more decision day next week before the 4th of July, likely Tuesday, if I had to guess. It's irregular for the court to be going this late. I think it speaks to the number of very important cases the court has dealt with this year, and probably dissension within the ranks of justices, that they're trading opinions and dissents back and forth, and they're trying to get all these cases into a place where they're ready to finally be released. So we're watching intently. It's going to be a big week for us. It's going to be a big week, really, for court watchers all across America. And I'm just excited to see what they hand down.
All right, I want to get to one of the cases, obviously the immunity case for Trump. So let's put that aside for a second. Does the court like to bury news, right? I remember on the Hill, we used to put out bad news on Friday nights and being like, just hope that kind of went into the ether. When you say the Tuesday before July 4th, is that when they might put out some controversial ones? Do they think like that? Or am I just thinking too politically?
Well, the court's a bit of a black box. You never really know what the justices are thinking. But for those of us who have been watching the court for a while, there does seem to be a trend that they'll issue controversial opinions towards the end of a week. They'll often bracket controversial opinions that go against an administration with decisions that are more positive for that administration. So if they're going to release a major defeat for the Biden folks, they'll often then quickly the next day or the next week release a win for the Biden folks. So you can kind of game it out a bunch of different ways. Certainly, I would expect that with any case with a heavy political valence, the Chief Justice won't want to issue that on Wednesday or Thursday of this week because of the presidential debate. I think in terms of public perception of the court.
Oh my God. You know what? That is, this is why I love you. I literally was like, I didn't even, God, this is so, this is why you watch this show, folks. People like Will just bring total insight. I love that. I didn't think of that. But that gets back to what I was asking. So they think of things like that. They're like, we're not issuing this debate, this big ruling about Trump right before a debate. So that's in their mind, right?
We don't really know that it's in their mind, but I would be shocked if it weren't a serious consideration. The last thing the Chief Justice wants is for Joe Biden to attack him during the debate. That politicizes the court. And I think the justices see their job as being above politics, at least to an extent. So I'd be very surprised if we see presidential immunity or any of the real hot button political cases come down before Friday.
Brilliant. All right. Well, now I can relax a little bit. Probably. But I see, this is fascinating because I get it. I mean, they don't want their case to be the subject of the debate. And it makes sense. Pro or con. But before, again, I want to get back to the merits of that in just a second. But there's one other thing that I wanted to ask you about. and it's a theory I have, which is Dick Durbin and a bunch of other folks were really going after Sam Alito, more importantly, his wife, for this faux flag issue. I believe that part of the reason that they were doing that is that this immunity case is going to benefit you guys, and they wanted to kind of muddy the waters because Alito's clearly going to be in the camp that somehow sides with Team Trump. And I believe that part of the reason they were trying to do this is to say, see, we knew it was a 5-4 decision. If Alito hadn't voted, which we've said he's got ethics problems and shouldn't have, it would have been 4-4 or something like that. But I believe that there's something actually going on here, which is why they went after Alito. Am I completely off base, or do you think that there's merit to that?
No, I think the left loves to sort of work the umpire, work the referee. President Trump likened it to the way that the basketball coach Bobby Knight always used to be up in the referees' faces. When you have a case like this that's politically controversial, the left pretty predictably now attacks the court and attacks conservative justices, tries to claim that they should recuse, even though there's absolutely no basis for them to do so. We saw this with Dobbs, the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade a couple years ago. We're seeing it again now. You know, for 40, 50 years, the left had a leftist court, a court that was willing to just rubber stamp their leftist agenda to significantly move the ball up the field in a leftist direction. Now that we have a more conservative court, a court that's deeply concerned with the Constitution, with the separation of powers, with core constitutional principles, the left is up in arms. And we see this basically every year with these attacks on the court, attempts to delegitimize the court. I think it's really despicable. I think that they should let the court do its job, and that they shouldn't be publicly attacking these justices, especially when, as is the case in this case, the justices have done absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, the idea that Justice Alito's wife flying a Revolutionary War era flag is somehow a signal of something nefarious, it's just patently absurd.
It's funny how the attacks on the court only matter one way, right? Yeah. It's like when you quit, and I always find it's funny. It's like the CNN attack yesterday that they thought when Caroline Leavitt was bringing up facts about Jake Tapper, those were attacks on CNN. And it was like, nope, that's literally, those are facts. She's not impugning his character or saying anything. She's stating facts. When Trump was stating facts about the judge's daughter in New York, those were facts. He wasn't saying she was a bad person. He wasn't saying that she was, violent, or, I mean, it wasn't making any charges or characteristics about it. He was stating facts about what she did for a living. They consider that attacks. When they attack the court, though, that's really a completely different situation, because the left doing it doesn't count.
Yeah, the left has this weird sort of reality distortion field in effect. You mentioned Caroline Leavitt. You know, the Trump campaign has put me on with George Stephanopoulos on CNN a bunch of times. And you see the same thing over and over again, which is that the second that you bring up any inconvenient fact for the mainstream leftist narrative, they react predictably and they throw up their hands and they shout and scream at you. They don't want to hear facts that pierce their narrative, that cut to the heart of a lot of these important issues. And I think it's almost a defense mechanism for them at this point. But the facts truly are on our side. We saw that in New York. We've seen that in really all the cases that we're litigating for President Trump. What we're dealing with here is an absolutely lawless campaign of lawfare that's being dictated, that's being led by Joe Biden and his closest political allies. And Americans need to see these cases for what they are, which is a flagrant attack, a flagrant weaponization of the courts for purposes of election interference. I believe this is all about interfering with President Trump's ability to run for office. And to me, that's just deeply un-American. We're supposed to contest elections at the ballot box and not in courtrooms in this country. That's fundamental to our republic.
So outside of the immunity case, and I keep punting on this, I apologize, but I have a lot of questions on that, and I don't want to mix streams here. What are the other big cases that, as conservatives, we should be paying attention to that the court will rule on between now and the end of the term?
So this is getting a little nerdy, but one of the most important administrative law opinions probably in the history of the country is expected to come down any day. This is an issue that lawyers often refer to as Chevron deference. It's the idea that courts should defer to bureaucratic decision-making, to federal departments and agencies when they interpret the law. This has allowed the left in many instances to essentially set law without passing laws. It's allowed these deep state bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. to fundamentally change the shape of the country. And it appears at least somewhat likely that the court is going to step back from this doctrine of deference. They're going to allow the federal courts to be much more intrusive and inquisitive about the lawfulness of the rules and regulations being passed out of Washington, D.C. So for those of us who care about small government conservatism, for those of us who care about our constitutional order, reining in these deep state bureaucrats it's really important. And that's another blockbuster case we have coming down from the court. There's also a decision out of Idaho that's under review for the Supreme Court now. Lawyers call this an EMTALA issue. That's a federal statute relating to the provision of emergency health care. The Biden administration has attempted to use this statute to violate the conscience rights of doctors, to basically force them to provide abortions, to force hospitals to provide abortions in defiance of state law, essentially overriding state law through this complicated federal statutory apparatus. The court has that case as well. I think for those of us who care about the pro-life cause, it's really important that the court steps in and stops the Biden administration from effectively doing an end run around state legislative processes all over the country.
The Chevron case, I've heard of that for years because of, legislative policy issues that I've been involved in. If that gets overturned, I got to imagine with this 6-3 court, and I know it's not as simple as 6-3, but I'm a layperson, so I can say that the odds of that happening have got to be pretty good, right? And then if it does happen, what are the implications immediately? Will it undo a lot of stuff, or would it just affect things going forward?
So I think you're right. I think that the court is likely to act here, in large part because of how lawless the Biden administration has been. They've used regulatory processes, they've used agency rulemaking to basically circumvent Congress in a way that's just deeply violative of the separation of powers and the way the Constitution is supposed to operate. So I think the court is likely to intervene. The result of that is going to be that Americans, normal Americans all over the country, will have rights to challenge agencies and these federal bureaucrats in the courts in a way that they haven't had previously. I think any step that allows all of us, the American people, to hold government bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. accountable for their decisions and to fight back against their lawless decisions, I think that's a very good thing for the country. So it gets lost a little bit in the mix just because it's a nerdy, wonky legal issue. But in terms of really reshaping our government, in terms of taking power away from the deep state, it's a really important case, and I'm certainly hopeful the Supreme Court does the right thing.
Yeah, me too. Because I think you're right. I mean, for people, just you say it's wonky, but I think you've sold it really well. Which is, this is a bunch of like agencies: the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health and Human Services, HUD, saying, "Well, we're just going to say that you must do X going forward, regulatory wise," and Congress has never touched it. Yeah. That's a problem. That's them making laws, as you put it. All right, let's kind of get to the immunity case. Do me a favor. For those of us, it's been a while. Tell us what's at stake and what the fundamental issues are in this case that President Trump has gone to the Supreme Court and said what?
So Jack Smith, the special counsel appointed by the Biden administration, indicted President Trump in Washington, D.C. for his efforts to investigate election fraud in the aftermath of the 2020 election. A lot of the actions that underlie that indictment were actions that President Trump took in his official capacity as president. So things like asking the Department of Justice to investigate election fraud, talking to members of Congress and state officials about election fraud. These are all core functions of the presidency, under the president's obligation under the Constitution to take care that the laws of the country are enforced. President Trump believed, as many of us do, that there was fraud in the 2020 election, and there was nothing particularly abnormal about his efforts in the aftermath of the 2020 election to have the government take a look at that and see what there was there. Now, Jack Smith is saying that this was all part of this grand criminal conspiracy. We've challenged this prosecution on the basis of presidential immunity. Our view is that the system that the Constitution sets up is that for a president's official acts in office, we're not talking about private conduct or stuff that the president does as a private citizen, but for his official acts in office, for his discharge of his responsibilities as president, you cannot criminally prosecute a president unless he's first impeached and convicted by the House and Senate. We believe that's the system that the Constitution set up, and we believe this prosecution against President Trump flagrantly violates that constitutional system. So we argued this in front of the U.S. Supreme Court in late April. We've been eagerly awaiting an opinion since then. I think the court is likely to acknowledge at least some doctrine of presidential immunity. The exact details, we'll have to wait and see. But they seem deeply troubled by this idea that any rogue prosecutor could basically, the day a president leaves office, haul him into court, indict him for his official acts. What President Trump has repeatedly said is that if this prosecution's allowed to stand, if a president doesn't have immunity for his official acts in office, then the presidency's done, that every future president will be threatened with every controversial decision he makes. His political opponents will say, we're going to criminally prosecute you. We're going to throw you in prison as soon as you leave office. And that's just going to cripple the ability of the president to make tough decisions while he's in office. So we think we have very strong grounds here. We think that in terms of preserving our constitutional system and the separation of powers, this is a really important case. And we think the court is going to side with us. I think oral argument was really revealing. The court seemed deeply concerned by the powers that the special counsel's office was claiming to prosecute a former president. So that's a case that a lot of folks have been waiting for a while, and hopefully we're approaching the end of the road here.
All right, so let me just sort of try to understand this a little better. Basically, I think it's pretty common sense. If a president commits an official act, sends troops into battle, orders a strike of some sort, they shouldn't be prosecuted after that's clearly within their official acts. And if they didn't have immunity, then you're right. Somebody would come after them and sue them and say, you killed my brother or whatever. There was collateral damage in this strike, and I'm suing you or I'm trying to get you prosecuted for murder or something. I think we can all agree on that. And it's funny how the left won't even acknowledge that, but I think you're absolutely right on that. Could the court, in your opinion, kind of split the baby? And I mean by that saying that they come down and say, look, we agree. The president of the United States should have immunity when conducting official acts, right? Because if they're doing X, Y, and Z, they shouldn't be able to be prosecuted after they leave office, exactly as you described. However, we, the court, do not believe that Donald Trump was acting as an official capacity as president when he committed the acts that Jack Smith is speaking of, or at least in several cases. Is that a possible outcome?
So the lower courts that address this case, the D.C. District Court and then the D.C. Circuit, both just issued blanket opinions saying that there is no presidential immunity.
Right.
So normally what the court would do here, if they were to recognize a doctrine of presidential immunity, they would remand it back down to the lower courts for consideration of exactly what you're talking about. Were these acts official? Were these acts non-official? In the civil context, it's well established going back to the 1980s that you can't sue a president for his official acts. So what would happen in the civil context would be exactly that, a remand back down to the lower courts, sending the case back down to the lower courts to have them deal with those sort of core factual issues. All we're really asking the court to do is apply the same rule, the same procedure that they would apply in the civil context, in the criminal context as well. So I think we're likely to see some hair splitting by the court, some attempt to sort of moderate this decision in a way. But I think the core holding is likely to be that there is immunity for presidents from criminal prosecution. And then I think they're likely to send it back down to the lower courts to figure out what it should look like in this case. And that's normal. That's what we've asked for. One thing to note is that if we get any win from the Supreme Court here, it's essentially impossible for that case to move to trial before the November election. The Biden plan here was to get Trump on trial probably last January and just keep him in trial after trial after trial. We've basically defeated that plan. I don't think there's going to be another trial before Election Day. Certainly, if the Supreme Court sides with us on this immunity issue, the chance of there being another trial before Election Day is essentially nil.
I'll be really interested in what the breakdown is of the court, because I'm blown away at the circuit court and the appeals court for the exact reason that you and I are discussing. I cannot see how a judge of any level would say it's probably a good idea to allow the president of the United States to be sued after they leave office for official acts. I have always thought that the smart legal argument, if I was on the left, if I were Jack Smith, is to say, fine, the president of the United States can't be sued for an official act, but this wasn't an official act. It was a campaign act or it was a personal act. And I'll make my case about that. I'm truly shocked, for history, for our republic going forward, that this was the way that they, and frankly, I'm scared about a judiciary that doesn't recognize that. That's what actually troubles me most. And just to play this out real quick, lastly, I see a scenario where you're right. The Supreme Court says this is insane. Of course, the president has immunity on official acts. We're remanding it back to the lower court. But then the lower court says, fine, okay, everything Trump did was in a personal capacity, and we're back to square one again.
Well, then we'll appeal that back up, and we'll go all the way back up to the Supreme Court if we need to make sure that President Trump's rights and, frankly, the Constitution are vindicated here. You know, it's interesting. If you go back and read our founding fathers, if you read James Wilson, James Madison, if you read Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion in Marbury v. Madison, it was very clear to people of our founding generation that the rule that we've proposed here was the rule. That you can't...
I mean, it's common sense.
Yeah.
It's common sense. As a non-lawyer, I'm literally saying we give cops immunity. We give so many people, government employees, immunity for their official acts. And yet the president of the United States, I actually think, look, I can't believe the Biden administration is not willing to weigh in on this and say, we don't want some red county or state prosecutor, Missouri or wherever, to go after him. I just, after he leaves office, I can't imagine that. But listen, all right, I want to move on because I want to get into this gag order issue. What started in New York has now moved down to Florida. I mean, maybe they just, it's joking, but I was trying to think of a funny joke about moving to Florida, but it's the gag order, so I won't. Listen, Trump, as I see this, is being prosecuted for the classified documents that he kept at Mar-a-Lago. Okay. The way I understood this case yesterday was the government saying, we want a gag order so that he can't criticize FBI agents. Now, again, walk me through where I don't get this. So can you explain what is it that the government, that the prosecution is trying to stop Donald Trump from doing?
Yeah, so first of all, it's worth noting that in the history of America, until President Trump and these cases came along, no political candidate has ever been subjected to a gag order by a court. No candidate running for office has ever been subjected to these sorts of limits on their First Amendment rights. What we've seen in case after case after case with President Trump is efforts by these prosecutors to basically shut him up, to get him to force him to stop talking publicly about these cases, to stop him from carrying his message to the American people. What's at issue here in Florida is an attempt by Jack Smith's team to prevent President Trump from talking publicly about the many irregularities in this case. We've raised very serious allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, of irregularities with the way that the search of Mar-a-Lago was conducted. There are very, very serious legal issues at stake in that Florida prosecution. And Jack Smith's response to our raising those issues in the public eye is to attempt to get the court to force President Trump to stop talking. It's deeply un-American. It violates his core First Amendment rights to comment on issues of tremendous public importance. So it's absolutely outrageous. Fortunately, they have not been successful so far. They rushed this attempt at a gag order into court late on a Friday night while we were actually in trial in New York. We've beaten back their attempt so far, and I think they're going to be unsuccessful for the simple reason that there's no basis in the law to prevent President Trump from talking about this stuff. And there's absolutely no basis in the law for them to get the kind of gag order that they've requested. So again, it's another front in this fight against this Biden campaign of lawfare, where not only are they dragging President Trump into court, but they're trying to prevent him from talking about how outrageous all of these cases are.
But is there something I'm missing that was in the filing? Like, as I said, like as a layperson, I'm watching back and they're saying he can't attack the FBI. And I'm like, why? Like, what is it? I mean, in the New York case, I thought it was wrong, right? But I think that politically and PR wise, I got it. You can't attack the jury. And I think the average person's like, oh, okay, you can't attack the jury because we don't want to influence them or intimidate them. In this case, I was like, I don't get it. Like, why? What threat is the FBI like running around? Like, I'm scared of Donald Trump. Like, oh my gosh, he's going to attack. Like, I didn't understand the rationale. What did I miss, if anything, that made this happen? It felt like, to your point, Jack Smith was like, somebody come up with something quick to get into court Friday night.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth noting that the FBI agents at issue have been anonymized. We've agreed to that, so their names aren't public. It's not like President Trump is singling out individual FBI agents. What he's talking about is how irregular this raid of Mar-a-Lago, which was conducted by the FBI, was. And I think it's his core First Amendment right to comment on this issue of tremendous public importance. So there's no basis for this. There's no actual security concern with respect to individual FBI agents. President Trump is just commenting on documents that are now public, including the search warrant of Mar-a-Lago, the terms on which it was conducted, and the way that it was conducted, which is absolutely his right. With respect to the New York gag order, we had this crazy situation where you had witnesses like Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels going on TV every night just lying about President Trump. And Judge Merchan prevented President Trump from correcting the record, from speaking publicly just to refute their claims. Judge Merchan prevented President Trump from talking publicly about things that we'd said in public court filings, like the fact that we believe Judge Merchan was irretrievably conflicted based on his history as a Biden donor and his daughter's work as one of the top Democrat fundraisers in the country. I mean, it's really important to understand what's going on here, which is an attempt by these left-wing prosecutors to prevent President Trump from pointing out to the American people how irregular the prosecutions against him are and how absurd all of these different cases are on their face. And that, to me, it's deeply violative of constitutional norms and President Trump's constitutional rights.
See, this goes back to the Caroline Leavitt thing that I was telling you about, right? She didn't attack Jake Tapper. She said, Google him. And yet CNN called that an attack. And this is the same thing. We're explaining to people the process by which your home was raided, or in the case of the New York case, saying, hey, the judge's daughter represents a bunch of clients that are making millions off the verdict, is a fact. Those aren't attacks. And I think where the left is beating us is what I always talk about, the words, right? They're sort of redefining what an attack is. And the idea, like, I said, hey, Will, how are you? And you go, you're attacking me. It's like, no, that's a pleasantry. That's a gesture. And you're now using the word attack to say anything that I say is an attack on you. I find it so fascinating, kind of like the same thing on the immunity. If we allow this to happen, we've redefined what the nature of an attack is and undermined anyone's First Amendment right. I'm concerned, again, how the left is twisting the judicial system to their short-term benefit to our long-term detriment.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly the right way to frame it. I think the left is so hell-bent on getting President Trump at any cost that they're doing real damage to our legal system in the process. I mean, that's something that, as an attorney, as an American, just really concerns me, that they're running roughshod over every rule in the book, all in this desperate attempt to keep President Trump tied up with these trials instead of allowing him to run for president. Joe Biden said it. November 9th, 2022, you can look it up. He was asked about what he was going to do about Trump running for president, and he said he was going to use, quote unquote, means under our Constitution, meaning a campaign of lawfare, to prevent President Trump from being president again. Not that he was going to beat him at the ballot box, not that he was going to campaign vigorously against him, but he was going to use lawfare to prevent President Trump from being president. And that's what we've seen. The gag orders are part and parcel of that. All of these criminal cases are part and parcel of that. There's even civil litigation. You know, they've sued President Trump constantly. The E. Jean Carroll cases in New York, the New York AG's case, it's all an effort to interfere with his ability to run for president. And to me, it's just absolutely despicable.
I agree with you. I want to switch gears, though, and talk about Hunter Biden. It's interesting. Yesterday, he requested a new gun trial after he was convicted. Here's how The Hill wrote about it in their story. It said Hunter Biden, the son of President Biden, requested a new trial on federal gun charges Monday over a procedural matter the president's son was convicted, blah, blah, blah. In court filings Monday, Hunter Biden attorney Abby Lowell claimed that his client's convictions, and this is the quote, should be vacated because the judge overseeing the case did not have the jurisdiction to impanel a jury and hold a trial prior to a higher court giving a formal go-ahead. Lowell wrote that Hunter Biden filed 2 appeals with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, both of which were ultimately dismissed. However, the appeals court still has not issued a formal mandate denying one of those appeals, Lowell said, claiming that the procedural issue should render the verdict void. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's absolute garbage. They're desperate and they're embarrassed because the president's son was just convicted of being a crack addict illegally in possession of a firearm, which is obviously very embarrassing to the president. It's very embarrassing to the president's family, President Biden's family, I should say. And they're desperate to get this thing thrown out. Hunter Biden also goes to trial in September on tax fraud charges in California. They're doing anything they can to sort of subvert these verdicts, to make the American people look away. I think this challenge to the jury verdict in Delaware is totally baseless. Abby Lowell Hunter's lawyer is going to get absolutely crushed on it. But in the meantime, they're just trying to kind of cover up for Hunter, for the entire Biden family. And they're, I think, disappointed that this Delaware jury, who have known the Biden family, for decades, wasn't influenced by the fact that all of these Biden family members and politicos were showing up to court to support Hunter. I mean, they had a friendly jury in a friendly jurisdiction, and yet the jury saw the facts for what they were, which is that Hunter was just very clearly guilty of the offenses that he was charged with.
Yeah, no brainer on that one. Once again, it's one thing if you attack the court, if you're on the right. If you're on the left, it's like, well, that's just par for the course. Before I let you go, I want to ask you, yesterday, we keep talking about what the court has left on its plate for this cycle, this session, but they said yesterday, court to hear case on gender-affirming care for trans youth. How big of a deal is that, and how impactful could a ruling be in terms of what the states are doing in terms of gender-affirming care? Because I wonder, where's that line between federal and state?
Yeah, so this is a case that comes out of Tennessee. My friend, the Attorney General of Tennessee, Jonathan Skrmetti, is sort of leading the fight there. Tennessee passed a law, a very reasonable law, saying that you can't use these gender surgeries on minors. That's been challenged in the courts on what I believe is a baseless constitutional theory. And I'm glad that the court agreed to take this case because I believe the court will end up siding with the state of Tennessee, will affirm what the Tennessee legislature did here, and give guidance to the states that if a state legislature wants to ban these sort of radical medical interventions that have the potential to really scar these children for life, that's within the authority of a state legislature. So again, it's an important case. I think it's going to be a blockbuster case next term. And I'm glad the court decided to hear it because I think it'll give a lot of clarity to state legislatures around the country that if they want to take action on this important issue, they can.
That's great news. All right. Well, hopefully the court rules in that direction, because I think it's so important what's happening to kids right now. I really do think in 10, 20 years, we're going to look back and wonder what the heck that we did experimenting on these kids in the way that we have. So I'm glad the court is addressing this now before it gets too late. Will Scharf, I appreciate you being with us. Always great. And like I said, man, I learned a ton at the front, so this is super helpful. Thank you for being with us, guys. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification button. We went live last night. You never know when we're going to do it again. If you hit the notification button, you will know on YouTube and Rumble. Make sure you're also subscribing on the audio versions at Apple Podcast, iHeart, and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We got a big week as that debate comes closer and closer to us. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.